They call it the clean version of hell. A place so secure that even sound doesn't escape. Inside these concrete walls are men the government calls too dangerous for human contact. No bars. No yard. No voices. Only steel, concrete, and silence. This isn't a movie. This is real. Welcome to ADX Florence, the prison that doesn't just lock people away. It erases them. The birth of a living tomb. Deep in the heart of Colorado, 100 miles south of Denver, sits a fortress unlike any other. United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, better known as ADX Florence. Built in 1994, ADX was designed for one purpose: to contain the uncontrollable. Before ADX, America's prisons were already overcrowded and violent. Escapes, riots, and murders were becoming a terrifying trend, from Marion Prison's lockdowns to Leavenworth's bloody stabbings. The Federal Bureau of Prisons needed a solution. A place to send the worst of the worst: terrorists, spies, serial killers, gang leaders, all those who couldn't be handled anywhere else. The result was a facility engineered not just to punish the body, but to break the mind. The blueprint of isolation. ADX sits on 37 acres of barren desert land, flat, windswept, silent. From above, it looks almost clinical. But beneath its sterile design is a network of control systems so precise it borders on psychological warfare. Each inmate lives in a cell 7 feet wide, 12 feet long, smaller than a walk-in closet. The bed, desk, and stool are made of solid poured concrete. The mirror is polished steel. The window is a 4-inch slit cut into the wall, angled upward so the prisoner can see nothing but sky. Inside these walls, the concept of time dies. Days blend into one another. There is no sunrise or sunset, only the endless hum of fluorescent lights. Most inmates spend 23 hours a day inside that box. Their 1 hour of recreation happens in another concrete room the size of a dog kennel, alone, surrounded by 20-foot walls and a steel grate ceiling. There's no yard, no contact with other humans, and no sound, except your own breathing. The birth of control units. ADX didn't come out of nowhere. Its roots trace back to Marion Federal Penitentiary in Illinois, once the most dangerous prison in America. In 1983, after 2 guards were murdered in a single day, Marion was locked down permanently. No more movement. No more yard time. The entire prison became a control unit, an experiment in total isolation. The results were devastating. Inmates started losing their minds, hallucinating, self-harming, screaming through the night. But instead of seeing this as a failure, the government saw it as a template. If total control worked at Marion, why not build an entire facility around it? That's how ADX was born. A perfected version of isolation, backed by millions in federal funding and an architectural philosophy borrowed from maximum security psychology. Designed to erase you. Every part of ADX serves a psychological function. The cells aren't just small, they're designed to create sensory disorientation. The window slit is placed at a height that prevents inmates from seeing the horizon. Without a horizon, your brain loses spatial reference. It becomes easier to manipulate your sense of time and self. Even the doors are layered, a solid steel door first, then a second mesh door. The sound that escapes is filtered, flattened, and swallowed by the concrete. Communication between inmates is nearly impossible. If you scream, no one answers. If you cry, no one hears. Inside ADX, silence becomes a weapon. The inmates of the impossible. So who ends up here? Only about 400 men, but each one is infamous. Ramzi Youssef, the 1993 World Trade Center bomber. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. Jakar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber. Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th 9/11 hijacker. El Chapo Guzman, Mexico's most powerful drug lord. Terry Nichols, co-conspirator in the Oklahoma City bombing. These men share one address: 4900 Highway 67, Florence, Colorado. A place so secure that no one has ever escaped. Not once. Not even close. Voices from the inside. Few have survived ADX long enough to talk about it, but those who did, describe it as a living tomb. Former inmate Thomas Silverstein, once America's most isolated prisoner, spent 36 years in solitary confinement, 23 of them at ADX. He once wrote, "I've lived years without touching another human being. The only way to stay sane is to create a world in your head, because the real one no longer exists." Prison psychologists call it SHU syndrome, short for Special Housing Unit. It includes paranoia, hallucinations, panic attacks, and a complete breakdown of self-identity. ADX doesn't rehabilitate. It reprograms the mind, by removing every trace of human connection. The paradox of safety. To the outside world, ADX is a triumph of control. No riots, no escapes, no staff deaths. But to human rights experts, it's something darker. In 2012, a lawsuit by the Center for Constitutional Rights accused the prison of violating the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. The case revealed a horrifying truth. Inmates with severe mental illness were being kept in total isolation, denied treatment, medication, or contact. Some mutilated themselves. Others smeared blood on their walls. One tried to saw off his own fingers. The government called it collateral damage in the name of safety. The start of the silence. ADX was meant to be the end of chaos. But instead, it became a mirror. A reflection of how far a society is willing to go to feel safe. Because inside these concrete cells, the question isn't, how do we stop monsters? It's, what do we become when we build places like this? And for the men trapped behind the steel, the only thing louder than silence is your own mind slowly unraveling. Inside the cell, 23 hours of silence. When you wake up in ADX Florence, there's no sunrise, no birds, no voices, only the sterile hum of fluorescent light and the low buzz of air vents pushing recycled air into your concrete tomb. Here, morning doesn't begin, it resumes. Because in this place, time doesn't move forward. It loops. Endlessly. The routine of isolation. Every day at ADX follows the same mechanical script, one written to erase individuality. At 5 a.m., the lights flick on automatically. There's no switch inside the cell. A disembodied voice crackles over the intercom. Inmates, prepare for breakfast. The meal slides through a small steel slot in the door. Scrambled eggs, oatmeal, maybe a carton of milk. No human hands are visible, just the sound of metal scraping metal. For the next 23 hours, the prisoner exists in a world of repetition. 12-foot walls, a steel sink, a toilet, and a concrete bed. You can walk 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. That's your workout. Some men count the bricks in their wall, over and over, until they can see them in their sleep. Others start talking to the drain in their sink, just to hear something answer back. The hour of freedom. At 9 a.m., a voice echoes again. Recreation. Unit 3. Stand by. This is the only hour of freedom inmates get, though freedom here looks nothing like what that word means outside. An officer appears behind the glass of the control booth. He presses a button, and heavy doors slide open with a metallic growl. The inmate steps into handcuffs, ankle shackles, and a belly chain, all locked in place before the door even opens fully. He is escorted, alone, through a narrow hallway lined with mesh and cameras to an outdoor recreation cage, a concrete room the size of a one-car garage, open only to the sky through a wire mesh ceiling. This is where prisoners see daylight. They can look up, not out. Most just pace. Some stand in silence and tilt their heads back, eyes closed, just to feel the sun on their face. Then, after 60 minutes, the officer presses another button. The door closes. And the silence begins again. The architecture of control. ADX is more than just secure. It's a machine designed to manage human behavior through architecture. Every camera, every angle, every sound is engineered to maintain one thing: control without contact. Even the mirrors in the cells aren't glass, they're polished steel, impossible to break. The windows are narrow slits angled so the only visible thing is the sky. No mountains. No trees. No horizon. The cells themselves are designed to absorb noise, a deliberate move to prevent communication between prisoners. You can scream until your throat bleeds, and no one will hear you. Even the sound waves die in here. The psychology of solitude. Experts have called ADX a laboratory of sensory deprivation. Psychiatrist Dr. Craig Haney, who has interviewed inmates across America's most secure prisons, once said, "The most dangerous thing about ADX is not what you can see, it's what you can't, the silence, the absence, the lack of human acknowledgement. It's a slow-motion psychological execution." Prisoners begin to lose their grip on reality within months. They report hearing footsteps that aren't there, feeling bugs crawl on their skin, seeing flashes of light in total darkness. Some stop speaking entirely. Others start conversations with their reflections, just to hear a voice that won't ignore them. And then, there are the screams. From the few who still have the energy to fight their sanity. The echoes bounce down the hallways at night. Distorted, haunting, almost mechanical. Guards call them ghost shifts. The case of Jack Powers. No one symbolizes the psychological cost of ADX like Jack Powers. Once a decorated soldier, Powers was sentenced for bank robbery and later transferred to ADX for assaulting an officer. In letters smuggled out of the prison, he described what life there did to him. The walls close in. You begin to hear whispers. You start to believe your cell is breathing. I once counted the screws in my bed frame 12,000 times, because I had to do something that proved I still existed. He began hallucinating, seeing faces in the concrete, shadows forming words. He cut himself open, over and over, just to feel something real. By the time he was transferred out, he'd spent 12 years in solitary confinement. Doctors said his mental health was permanently damaged. He later testified in a lawsuit against the Bureau of Prisons, claiming that ADX doesn't rehabilitate. It erases identity, meals, madness, and monotony. Every action in ADX is ritualized, not by choice, but by force. Meals come at the same time. Cleaning happens by schedule. Even letters and visits are controlled by automation. Inmates can't make eye contact with staff. Communication happens through intercoms, glass, or paper slides. The only other people they see are guards, and even then, only for seconds during checks. It's not that you're forgotten here. It's that you're remembered only by the system. The step-down mirage. Technically, ADX offers a program called the step-down unit, a path to reduce isolation if inmates show good behavior. In theory, it's hope. In practice, it's control disguised as mercy. Each level reduces restrictions slightly, maybe an extra hour of rec time, or permission to buy a small radio. But progress takes years, and a single outburst resets the clock. Many inmates never make it out. Not because they don't want to, but because ADX has already rewired their minds to function only in silence. When those men finally leave, many can't survive in normal prisons. They panic when they hear voices. They freeze in open spaces. Some beg to go back to ADX, because it's the only place their new selves recognize as real. The sound of nothing. A former guard once described it best. You think a quiet prison would be peaceful. But it's not quiet. It's dead. The silence has weight. Inside ADX, sound itself becomes the enemy. Prisoners hear every drip from the sink, every buzz of electricity, every heartbeat echoing in their skull. After years, even those tiny noises become unbearable, until your brain starts inventing new ones to fill the void. You start hearing your own past, your own regrets, and you can't turn them off. The 23rd hour. At 10 p.m., the lights dim slightly. Not enough for darkness, just enough for shadows. A guard walks the tier, his boots echoing down the corridor. For a few seconds, his silhouette passes the narrow window in each cell. Then he's gone again. That's the last human presence until morning. The rest of the night belongs to the sound of air moving through vents and the whisper of your own thoughts. 1,000 echoes bouncing around a room built to break you. The mind breaks. Madness, suicide, and survival inside ADX Florence. In ADX Florence, there's a moment, a breaking point, when silence stops being silence and starts sounding like screaming. It doesn't happen suddenly. It builds. Slowly. Methodically. The human mind isn't designed for total isolation. It needs sound, motion, touch, proof that it exists. When all of that is taken away, the brain begins to collapse inward, devouring itself. And that's exactly what ADX does best. The quiet deaths. The Bureau of Prisons doesn't release suicide statistics from ADX Florence. But former guards and ex-inmates have spoken, in hushed tones, about the deaths that never make the news. One officer described it as a place where people stop being alive before they die. Between 2000 and 2015, dozens of inmates either took their own lives or died under mysterious circumstances, often ruled as natural causes. But what's natural about a man hanging himself with a bedsheet tied to an air vent? Or a prisoner biting open his wrists because the guards won't give him a razor? One inmate wrote in a letter that death is the only visitor that makes it through these walls. The case of Tommy Silverstein. No story captures ADX's horror like that of Tommy Silverstein, often called America's most isolated man. After killing a correctional officer at Marion Prison in 1983, Silverstein was placed in permanent solitary confinement. For the next 36 years, he lived in total isolation, more than anyone in modern U.S. history. When he was moved to ADX in 2005, he had already spent 2 decades without human contact. By then, his world was the size of a cell, and his memories were fading like dust. He once wrote, "They've taken everything, my freedom, my dignity, my name. Now they're taking my sanity. I talk to spiders just so I don't forget what a voice sounds like." Silverstein tried to challenge his confinement, arguing it was torture. But courts ruled that his isolation was necessary for safety. He died in 2019, not from violence, but from the slow decay of being forgotten. His obituary didn't list a cause of death. It didn't have to. The unofficial psychiatric ward. ADX Florence isn't a hospital, but it might as well be a psychiatric graveyard. In 2012, a lawsuit called Cunningham versus Federal Bureau of Prisons revealed the shocking truth. ADX was housing severely mentally ill prisoners, many without medication or therapy. These men weren't terrorists or mob bosses. They were schizophrenic, bipolar, paranoid, people who needed treatment, not torture. The court documents described scenes that sound almost fictional. Prisoners smearing blood and feces on their walls. Men cutting their own skin and writing messages in their blood. Inmates screaming for days, begging for help that never came. One prisoner, diagnosed with severe depression, begged guards to check his cell. When they finally did, it was too late. He had strangled himself with a piece of bedsheet tied to his concrete bed frame. The Bureau called it an isolated incident. But inside ADX, isolation is the incident. The psychological torture. Psychologists who study sensory deprivation say it causes effects similar to psychosis. After weeks, you start losing track of time. After months, you forget the sound of your own voice. After years, you start seeing things that aren't there. In one study, researchers found that inmates in long-term solitary develop symptoms of traumatic brain injury, not from impact, but from sensory starvation. The brain literally begins to rewire itself in the absence of stimulation. You begin to dream while awake. You see light where there's none. You hear footsteps that never existed. And worst of all, you start believing the walls are whispering your name. The guard's nightmare. The officers at ADX aren't immune, either. Many guards suffer from what psychologists call secondary trauma. They describe the sound of silence as unnatural, the long corridors as haunted, and the experience as psychologically draining. One guard, in an anonymous interview, said, "You think it's easy because they can't touch you. But after a few years, the place gets inside your head too. You start dreaming about concrete. Even the staff cafeteria is separated by security glass. Nobody shakes hands. Nobody laughs. It's a culture of containment, for everyone inside. The attempted escape. In 2012, inmate Richard Lee McNair, a master escape artist who had previously broken out of 2 prisons, was transferred to ADX Florence. He later described it as a place you can't even imagine escaping, not because of walls, but because it takes your will away. The last man who tried to escape, in 2010, didn't make it 50 feet. He slit his wrists in his cell instead. In ADX, the idea of freedom becomes so abstract that some prisoners no longer want it. Their cells become their entire universe, a reality that's safer than remembering what life outside used to feel like. The shadow of El Chapo. When Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was sentenced to life in 2019, he was sent to ADX Florence. His lawyers called it a fate worse than death. El Chapo, who had escaped twice from high-security prisons in Mexico, now spends 23 hours a day in a windowless cell. No contact, no conversation, no light from the outside world. His wife and family are banned from visiting. His only human interaction is through a slot in a steel door. During court testimony, his lawyer said, "He has not seen the sun in years. The silence is eating him alive." Even one of the world's most powerful men couldn't escape ADX's invisible punishment. Not the bars, but the silence. The experiment that never ended. When ADX Florence was built, officials promised it would be a last resort. But over time, it became a template, influencing the design of other supermax facilities across the world. Now, over 80,000 prisoners in the U.S. live in some form of solitary confinement, inspired by the same blueprint that built ADX. And yet, the results remain the same. Broken minds, empty eyes, and men who forget who they are. Psychologists now call it institutional psychosis. The system builds it, then blames the inmate for breaking. The final hour. By 9 p.m., the corridor lights dim. Inmates lie on their concrete beds, staring at the ceiling. There's no darkness, only a permanent, gray twilight. Some pray. Some whisper to ghosts. Some just wait for morning, though they know it will look exactly like today. And somewhere in the silence, you can almost hear the question that no one dares to answer. How much of a man can you strip away before he stops being human? The prison that destroys the mind. ADX Florence isn't just a prison. It's a mirror, reflecting what happens when control becomes obsession. It's a place built not just to hold the guilty, but to erase them, piece by piece, thought by thought, heartbeat by heartbeat. For the men inside, there's no redemption, no forgiveness, no sound. Only walls. And silence. And the slow unraveling of what once made them human. Because at ADX Florence, you don't just lose your freedom. You lose yourself.